Have you ever met somebody and thought, they're not from here. They don't fit in. What did it make you think? Did it make you laugh? Did it make you cry? Did it make you feel sorry for that person? Did it make you suspicious? Did it just make you curious? I wonder what their story is. Now, have you ever been that person? Have you ever felt like you stuck out? Like, I am not like everybody else here. Now, I was in college and I was serving with a team. We were in Monterrey, Mexico, which is the same place we just sent our short-term missions team over spring break to visit our missionaries, the Guzmans. And I was there 20 years ago with a team. We were serving with children's homes and doing some projects, just some improvements, and then just playing with the kids. And I didn't and I don't know Spanish. Still don't know really a lick of it, but from the moment I arrived in Mexico, in the airport, almost every single day, I heard the same phrase when people saw me, over and over and over. And finally, I heard it again, and I was, after playing lots of soccer with these kids, one of the teenagers who was really trying to learn English, I asked them, I sat next to them, I said, "What does muy alto mean?" And he's had your same chuckle. He goes, muy alto, Andrew. He goes, "You are very, very tall. You stick out in our culture," he says. I thought, that makes a lot of sense. Yes, of course. They all notice me. Of course they do. I cannot blend in these cultural situations very well. That's not my strong suit. And so, Andy, I hope that doesn't disqualify me from serving on any trips in the future. Hopefully not. Maybe you need a point person. Go find Andrew if you get lost. I'm good at that. When we started this series, Where is Jesus? I shared about the deficiencies of my height when it comes to playing hide and seek. And afterwards, many of you came up to me and said, "Oh, I bet it is so hard being tall. I feel so bad for you." I get it. Here you go. All of the difficulties of being me. I'm just sharing them in front of you. I bet you didn't think about sticking out in other cultures. Not to mention fitting on the plane. Getting there is also an issue. But this is not about me complaining being tall. I'm not doing that. I love being tall. I'm not complaining. This sermon is not about me, but it is about people that sometimes I have a very difficult time relating with. If you brought your Bible, I hope you did, turn to the book of Ruth. You can find a Bible in the chair or pew in front of you. Turn to the book of Ruth. We'll be going through this story. You may be familiar with the story of Ruth. It's a short story. It's a famous one. We can kind of tell it in one sitting. And if you're not familiar with the book of Ruth, I am so glad that you are here. How exciting is that? That's what we're here to do, is to learn about this book and how it points to God. But Ruth is a foreign woman. She is not an Israelite. In fact, she's a Moabite, and she is not from Israel. And she is an outsider. She was an outcast. She stuck out. And we don't think it was because of her height. The text does not tell us how tall Ruth was, but I don't think that's why she stuck out. It was about everything else about Ruth. And so in this book, we're going to meet Ruth, who moves from Moab to Israel as a foreigner. But we not only meet her, but we meet multiple different people who were immigrants. In this story, in many ways, this is a story of immigrants. And this story takes place, according to the very first verse, Ruth 1:1, in the days when the judges ruled. The days when the judges ruled. So it's kind of a general time frame. There's not a specific date. We don't know exactly when this happened, but we can kind of try to piece some things together. And just so you kind of have a rough idea, we're talking about 1100 BC. give or take a little bit. So this is a long time ago, over 3,000 years, on the other side of the world, with people that it may be have had experiences that couldn't be further from my personal experience and maybe yours. Because for me, all of my life, I've been in the dominant majority culture. I have been in the opposite socioeconomic category as Ruth, and I managed to migrate about 10 miles from my childhood home. So I have a hard time relating with these kinds of stories. So what does this really mean for us, if you relate more with me? Distant in every way. Well, in this story, Ruth has 85 verses in 4 short chapters. And we're not going to read all 85 verses, although I would encourage you to do that this week if you're curious. You can read it and discover it. But let's discover the story and ask some questions and just try to figure out, what could this possibly have to say for us so far removed from this story? So who is this story about? You may think, well, that's kind of a silly question, Andrew. It's the book of Ruth. Isn't this story about Ruth? Well, let's see who the story is really about. In the days when the judges ruled, verse 1, there was a famine in the land. This is the land of Israel. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. So it seems like the story really is about a man's family. And we learn who this is. Verse 2, the man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. And they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to Moab and lived there. Some people would say this book is really a story about that family. And we will meet and see how Ruth connects to this. But we begin with this man. And this story, I think, is about them, this small family, wife, husband, 2 sons, and they move from Israel to Moab, it tells us. And you're like, okay, that's a different country. I get it. And you may not think that's a really big deal. But Moab and Israel, not friends. They were enemies, in fact. They had a very long and adversarial relationship, Moab and Israel. The Moabites did not worship Yahweh. They did not know God. Even though they were neighbors, they had conflict every turn and routinely with Israel. During this period in world history, they were enemies and fought in actually battles against one another. And we're pretty sure, just a little context here, the ancient cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, we're pretty sure were in the boundaries of Moab. By this time in Ruth, those had already been destroyed. That was in the book of Genesis. And you can read about that in Genesis chapter 19, how the Moabite people came to be. And I'm not going to read that because it would make you blush. It is quite an interesting story and tells you just what kind of people the Moabite people were. And in fact, we know they were adversaries at this time. If you go to Judges chapter 3, let me just read this for you. This is the days of the judges. One of the judges, Ehud, said, "Follow me, for the Lord has given Moab, your enemy, into your hands." So, in case you didn't know, the Moabites and the Israelites did not mix. So, for a family to say, we're going to go to Moab, that should catch your attention right here in this first verse. What was it that motivated this family to say, we're going to leave Bethlehem and go to Moab? Well, it tells us there was a famine in the land. There was a famine in Israel. And so you can imagine times were tough. It was tight. You can just imagine what happened was this family said, we think it might be better off over there. And so Elimelech, the patriarch of the family, says, we're all going, even to a place that's probably not going to welcome us with open arms. We're going to move. And so they go cross those borders into Moab. And then verse 3, immediately Elimelech, Naomi's husband, dies. And she was left with her 2 sons. Disaster strikes as soon as they get there. This could not be going more poorly. And so they, the sons, marry Moabite women, verse 4 says, and one was named Orpah, the other named Ruth. There she is, there's Ruth. She's a Moabite. But after they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. This is a tragic story. She's left all alone with 2 Moabite daughters-in-law, which was never the plan, that her sons would marry non-Israelites, people that didn't know God, and that all this would happen. This is not the way she envisioned her life, Naomi. And then verse 6, it's kind of all falling apart, and Naomi finally hears in Moab, because that's where they were, that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them. So she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. So the famine is over. And Naomi's like, it is bad enough here in Moab. I think we should all go back to Israel. At least maybe we could find some food. And what happens here in the next chapter is Naomi's conversations with these 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. And she really actually tries to convince them, like, I think you should stay. You don't need to come to Israel. You don't need any of that. I know you're going to be foreigners. You're going to be outsiders. People are going to look down on you. And those 2 ladies did not need to be told that. They knew how it was going to be in Israel. And we should not suggest or assume that Naomi was so mature in her faith, that she was such a spiritual giant, or that she was in a great space mentally. That's how she was just giving such wise advice to these daughters-in-law. That could not be further from the truth. We know this because of what she says later when she finally gets to Israel. Jump to verse 20 in chapter 1. She says this, "Don't call me Naomi," she told them, "call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." Wow. That is strong. Just call me bitter, because that's how I feel. She's completely depressed. She has no hope. She's already poor. We know that her family, Elimelech, they already sold their land that they had as a family just to go to Moab, and now they have nothing. They don't have land. They don't have any assets. She has no husband. She has no children. She has no way to provide for herself. She's too old to work. She's too old to get married and have a family. She has pretty much lost everything in this culture. And so for those of you wondering, yes, the story got even more depressing. To which I would say this feels kind of spot on when it comes to storytelling in our day and age, even with kids' stories. I don't know if you've noticed this or seen this, but even some of our family's favorite movies, they kind of start off a little somber sometimes, don't they? One of our favorite movies when our kids were younger, Finding Nemo. You like that movie? Who doesn't like Finding Nemo, right? You know how that story starts. Marlin's wife and 500 fish babies are murdered by the shark. Yeah, maybe not a shark. I don't know what it was, but they are toast, right? That's a pretty depressing way to start the movie in the first minute. You know, the movie Up, we like that movie, great movie. Carl's wife, love of his life, spending every time together. You know, they're going through life and she dies. I mean, it's just sad. These stories, they have to start this way. Can't we just be happy and celebrate stories where there's not this tragic backstory? But here we are. And I think it is Pixar's goal to make you cry at every movie, but that is how it goes. But who is this story about? Is it about Ruth? Is it about Elimelech's family and Naomi? Yes, there are other people involved, but it seems like Naomi is actually the one that this story is about. So why is this book called the Book of Ruth? Well, every story of immigration I've ever heard, whether that's talking with people that I know came from somewhere else that moved to our country, or maybe stories that maybe are even in your own family. Maybe it starts with grandma and grandpa, or great grandma and great grandpa. They moved here from wherever, right? And why did they do that? There was a promise of a better life, wasn't there? You know, there's this opportunity, there's this thing that we think could happen, could break the right way, could provide for our family. It's going to be better there. And when you look at Elimelech and Naomi did this twice. We're going over here because it's going to be better there. And Naomi then moves back to Bethlehem. Why? Because it's going to be better for her there. That is important. Every story that I know, that I have heard, people that I have met, again, that seems to be the story. But this is the book of Ruth, not the book of Naomi. Why? Well, one of the daughters-in-law, Orpah, seemed to be a very rational person when Naomi gives her the fantastic offer of, you could move and be a foreigner, a racial outcast, be completely poor and hang out with me and my great bitter attitude. Sound good? And she's like, no thanks. I'm going to stay right here in Moab. And she says, I totally understand. I get it. I would do the same thing. That's basically what Naomi says. But the second daughter-in-law, Ruth, she says something that maybe you've heard before. Maybe you heard it at a wedding, but this is not a wedding. But I will read it to you anyways. Go to chapter 1, verse 15. Look, says Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. Why would you want to be with me? Depressed, widowed, poor me. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people and your God, my God. And she doesn't stop there. Where you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. Now, it was no wedding, but she did say, till death do us part. And it is a beautiful statement of commitment. Hopefully you have heard that. It's the most famous verse in all of this book of Ruth. She did not want to follow the gods that she saw and grew up with in Moab. She knew that did not lead to life. It did not lead to fulfillment. It did not lead to peace. She wanted nothing to do with the gods of her people. She knew it was empty. She knew there was no future there. But she was under no illusion that going with Naomi to Israel was going to make her life on this earth better. She knew beyond a shadow of a doubt it was going to be worse. She expected that it was going to be hard and even, you can tell, potentially bring death. Without any protection, any male figures, they would have been completely poor, completely vulnerable, no place to go. There was a very real possibility that they could have been taken advantage of or even killed, as she suggests. But she goes, becomes a racial outsider, a foreigner, an immigrant by choice in this patriarchal society without any safety net. This is something that Ruth chose to do. That's wild. She did not have to do this. It was utterly selfless to serve this woman that she had come to know and to love over 10 years, Naomi. And so they get to Bethlehem, in Naomi's attitude. We already read that. Not really great. But in chapter 2 and chapter 3, in order to eat, Ruth kind of goes to work. She starts to glean. And you're like, I don't know what that means. Well, gleaning was a provision in the Israelite law, in the law of Moses, for the poor. Because there was no Social Security, there was no safety net or welfare in these days. But God put a provision in the law for people that had needs, that had lost everything for whatever reason. He had a provision for situations like this, that farmers were not supposed to harvest every nook and cranny all the way to the edge of their land. They were actually supposed to leave a little margin on the edge. They weren't supposed to harvest and take everything for themselves. They're supposed to leave that. And then those who would fit in this category, that had need, that were poor or foreigners, would come and harvest the grain or whatever on the edge, and then they could have food that way. But that was what they were supposed to do. So she is gleaning in the fields. Ruth is going to work to support Naomi and herself. And she happens to glean in a field from a man named Boaz. And then Ruth tells Naomi this, and that's when we see Naomi's attitude start to change. She's like, I know him. He is related to us. He's a distant family member. Maybe this Boaz could help us. And in addition to these gleaning laws, there were other provisions in the book of Moses. You could read it in Leviticus 25. I'm giving you all kinds of homework. You got to read Ruth, you got to read Leviticus, you got to read all this stuff. But you can take my word for it. You can study later. But Leviticus 25 is about a practice that was instituted, that was an option to rescue broken families, where there is a practice where a person called a kinsman redeemer could help. Now, this kinsman redeemer had to be a kinsman, meaning they had to be a relative of the family of the person who died. So Boaz was a relative of Elimelech, this patriarch of the family, Naomi's husband. And this relative could purchase the land of their former relative at a very great price, and it could come back into their family. But it came with lots of strings attached. Yes, you would get the land, you could work the land, but you would also have to take on supporting the family. You would have to support Naomi and then marry Ruth. If there was a widow or a daughter, you had to marry them and provide for them. And then if you had any children, or even now immediately the inheritance, anything, all of your wealth, all of your possessions, now you're legally married and it's half theirs. And then the children that you would have would be in that person's name. This kind of blows our mind because this is so far from our culture. We can't really understand it. It sounds like this would be incredibly unlikely. I mean, if you could purchase the land and have it for your family, you could see maybe people would do that. But then to like willingly take on this person's debt to rescue these folks that were at risk, all for somebody else's gain, seems kind of strange. And if this sounds like it would be unlikely, I'm pretty sure it was. We really don't know. There's not a whole lot of stories recorded where this practice is even noted as to actually happening, this thing in Leviticus 25. We don't know how often this took place. But by the end of this story, the end of Ruth chapter 4, there was actually a person closer related than Boaz to Naomi. And he said, no, I would never do that. That's crazy. I'm out. I'm not doing that. This is a foreign person. I'm not taking Ruth. I'm not getting involved with this family. No one forced them to. He's like, I'm out. But Boaz says, yes. Okay. He redeems Ruth. He redeems Naomi. He redeems this land. They're given a home. Naomi has a family. And we're seeing at the very end, if you go all the way to chapter 4, verse 16, what a great picture. And we wrap up this Hallmark movie in a fantastic set. Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. This would be her grandchild. And the women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And yes, it is that David, that King David, who is from Bethlehem, where they were from in the first place. And it's just an amazing story of how God works. It just all worked out. I know there's a lot of details, a lot of things to know and understand about the story of the book of Ruth, but what does that mean for us? What does that even really mean? Well, does it mean we need to be like Boaz? That we should take on the debts of other people? That we should serve and seek to help people in need? Absorb that and serve them? Not only that, but he marries Ruth. All of his wealth became legally hers automatically, instantaneously. Are we supposed to step in and be that selfless for other people? Find ways to redeem and rescue others in need from their debts, from their past? Does it mean we need to be like Ruth? And in many ways, she is a greater redeemer than Boaz. A suffering servant of sorts, willingly saying, I'm ready to suffer to help Naomi. And it's almost like Boaz redeems Ruth, who redeemed Naomi. And this book is not the book of Naomi, it's not the book of Boaz, it's the book of Ruth. Because in many ways, she is the one that kind of shines in the story. She's unlike any immigrant I've ever met. She did not expect that better life when she chose to leave home. She knew that if Naomi was going to make it, she had to throw away her life. And by the end of this book, there is actually a statement that we would probably skip because it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to us. Go back to chapter 4, verse 15. Read this just for a second. It's very interesting. The last half says, there's these ladies talking to Naomi. And they say, your daughter-in-law, this foreign Moabite outsider outcast, is better to you than 7 sons. That maybe doesn't catch your attention. You're like, some of you have a son or two, and you're like, if I had 7 sons, my house would burn down. I don't know if I want 7 of these. And maybe that's true. But in the days of the judges, in ancient Israel, what do we know? 7 is a number of completeness. And when they thought about family, saying 7 sons would have been like, this means it's the picture of a perfect life. So these women are saying, this foreign woman, Ruth, it is better for you that you had her in your life than you had the perfect life. 7 sons means like the white picket fence, like the house on the lake with your kids growing up to get full ride scholarships at the Ivy League. And you did so well that you could retire early and do whatever you want, kind of like you did the 7-son life. Make sense? And so these people around her are like, wow, your life actually turned out better than the perfect life. That's wild. Having Ruth is better than anything you could have ever imagined, which is wild. So does this story say to us, we need to be more like Boaz? We need to be, to the best of our ability, we should be like Ruth to the people in our life, to the people in our family, to the people in our neighborhood, to the people we work with, to the people in this community, in our schools. If we're going to make an impact for God, do we need to be more like them? Can we just be real just for a second? I'm sure you don't mind if I just say what I really think here. Does that inspire you? Maybe a little. I mean, it does a little bit. It's like, this is a really neat story. It's moving on a certain level, isn't it? Like to see Ruth make these choices, to see Boaz step in, like it is inspiring a little bit to me. But when I think about it, I can definitely learn things from these incredible individuals. But am I really gonna be like Boaz? Am I really gonna be as selfless as Ruth with my life? I hope I can, but am I? I can't speak for you, but I know for me, I fall short of that standard. I definitely do. I know I'm not going to be this selfless. I just don't think that way all the time. I fall short. This is an incredibly high bar. Giving your life for other people, all of your comfort, all of your things for the good of other people. Not like some of it and I get to enjoy some, like all of it. That's incredible. My good deeds are not enough. My righteousness is like filthy rags, it says in the book of Isaiah. And I know I've shared a little bit about Katie and I's journey with foster kids in our home before. But many times when we had them in our home and we don't currently have any placements in our home, people would say things like, well, we could never do what you do. We couldn't do that. And no one ever said to us, I don't think, man, you're just a modern Ruth and Boaz. You two lovebirds. Little Ruth and Boaz over there. No one ever said that. And I'm glad they didn't. And I won't speak for her, but I don't feel like Boaz. I don't feel like Ruth because I know my own heart. I know what's going on in my own life. I know how hard it was to open up our home. I know how hard it is to serve other people. I know that experience pushed me not only to the edge, but like past the edge many times, emotionally, physically even. It was never easy. It was always inconvenient. And what I learned was that what God did in me was so much more than what I was doing for other people. It did not reveal good things inside of me. It revealed just how selfish I think I am, really at my core. That if I am honest, as we continue to pray, just our family, what is God calling us to do? How could we serve and love people in our world and in our community and really represent Christ? I hope that this story is not about being Ruth because it's really, really, really hard. And this is not something that's glamorous. This was not glamorous for Ruth. It was not glamorous for Boaz. And it's not glamorous when we step into those spaces in our life. And I am so grateful that this actually leads us to a different question. And the question is, what if all of this in the book of Ruth actually points to Jesus? What if it points to him instead of a moral example? In these 85 verses, redeem is found 23 times. And in verse 15, I'll start in verse 14. We already read part of verse 15. It refers to somebody that is not in the story. Listen to this. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age." Most commentators read these two verses and they're confused. Why didn't the ladies just say Boaz? Like, didn't Boaz redeem these ladies? How come they don't just say, let's make sure Boaz is famous? And didn't the redemption already happen? Like, he already purchased the land. He already married Ruth. There's already this child. Hasn't the redemption already happened? But here in Ruth chapter 4, it says he will. That actually this story is about somebody who's coming after them. There is a greater redemption in play. And the people of Israel would say, oh yeah, that's pointing to this great grandson in the story, the man by David who became the greatest king in all of Israel's history, David and Goliath David. He will renew you. Is it pointing to David? We don't believe that. We believe that there was one who was in the line of David, the Messiah himself, Jesus Christ, that this is who we are talking about. A more faithful, a more final, a more complete Redeemer, because there is a redemption that hasn't come yet. Like Ruth, Christ left his home in heaven with his Father, came to earth, setting aside his comfort, knowing that he was moving to a new neighborhood that was going to treat him way worse than where he was from. He was a suffering servant. He put on flesh, expecting at every turn that his life was going to be hard and harsh, even though he is the King of Kings. Like Boaz, he paid our past debts. He has fixed our family issues. He has wiped them all clean. Like Boaz, he is our kinsman, which is why he came in person. This salvation that we experience from God is not given from a decree from heaven or a sermon or a statement. I forgive them. He had to be a kinsman and came here, put on flesh to redeem us perfectly. He lived a real life. And just as Ruth said in chapter 1, verse 17, where you die, I will die. Yes, Jesus fulfilled that, but he said even further, I will not even let death get in between my redemption of you. I will defeat death, and death cannot even come in between us and what I have for you. He is the greatest friend, the greatest neighbor who has ever lived and welcomed us into his family. So we have an inheritance because of him. He's redeemed us. This message of Ruth is not that we have to earn that. Naomi did not earn that. In fact, many people say when Elimelech and Naomi went to Moab, they were saying, peace, Yahweh. They're abandoning God. We do not have to earn this. We do not have to be like Ruth. We don't have to earn it and be Boaz to earn God's favor. The promise is not that if we're like that, maybe God will give you 3 or 4 sons, like half of the dream. No, you get it all by saying, you are my Redeemer, Lord. We let him into our life. The message is like Ruth, if you give up your life, he gives you life. If you trust God with your life, he will take care of you. He will provide for you. He will give you a purpose. And we may not get the life that we expect, 7 sons, but it will be better. This outcast, stick out life that Ruth had is better. Jesus said it this way in Matthew 16. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it. Whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? What can anyone give in exchange for their soul? Elimelech sold his land. We sold our souls. We need a redeemer to redeem us, to pay what we could never pay, so that we could have a life and an inheritance beyond anything we could ever imagine. My Redeemer has rescued me. This is an invitation for you to say, I trust him too. If we give up our lives, we should expect, like Jesus says in Matthew, we're going to stick out. We're going to muy, that's such a terrible Spanish. Muy alto. We're going to stick out if we live this life for the Lord in a culture where life and resources are hoarded and preserved, and we live like Ruth and Boaz, not because we have to, not because we earn it, but because Christ loves us. And we live in confidence in that relationship with God who gives us healing and dignity and purpose. And we can walk alongside others in that way. And so Ruth is an example, not because we have to be her, but because she points to Jesus. And not only that, but Jesus came from her faithfulness in her very own family. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for your love. We thank you that we have stories like this that point to Jesus, that it's not a mystery when you came, who the Messiah is, who the Redeemer really is, and that you actually did it. You actually accomplished it. You finished the work. You've extended life to everybody who would call on the name of Jesus. And so we thank you and say, we love you, Lord, and invite you into our life and invite others to that same life with Jesus. Amen.